Gamechanger. This is a series of shows where I delve into your save and offer you my perspective. It's not meant to be a critique, just a different way of looking at things. And on today's show, we've got a save here from Joseph, or as he likes to call himself, Spidey. He's taken over at Millwall. He's got a few more games and he is trying to get into the playoffs, and it's my turn to try it out. My name is Daljit. This is Bustthenet. So this is the situation as it sits. Millwall are trying to get into the playoffs. They have some work to do with some interesting matches to come. They've got matches against Swansea, Charlton, Borough, Hull, Blackburn, QPR, Huddersfield. When I was given the save, basically the information I got from you was essentially that you're playing the 4-4-2 MAVE system that I designed, which is kind of cool, and you just want to understand how to use pass into space a bit more effectively. And I see that you've got some very good results under the belt. There have been some bad results, probably patch driven, right? So because I see a few bad performances here, for example against Reading, you conceded quite a few goals. You're playing against a 5-2-1-2. Now a 5-2-1-2 doesn't like to come out, but when it does, those wing backs are going to come up the pitch, and if you don't shut their wing backs up, as you can see from this screenshot here, you get into a lot of trouble. So the problem with playing against systems like this is you need to know how to trigger the pass into space. You need to know how to put pressure on them so that their wing backs don't become such a big influence on the game. The narrow systems in the game, if you allow the narrow systems to exert influence on the wingbacks, they're going to get high up the pitch. They're going to overpower your midfield in no time, and then you're going to have a problem dealing with them. And this was a frequent problem I saw in your side. Your backline isn't very fast. The other thing that I noticed as well was the ball over the top. Whenever you push your defensive line up, the ball will come over the top. Your slow defense had no time to react, and you'd suffer. So I looked at a few of your matches, and I'm good. I only focus actually on the last few. You played against Barnsley as well, because we have a patch. The patch early on in the patch cycle for FFM, the balls over the top were glorious, right? You could just play any kind of a ball over the top, and you get a goal. And then lo and behold, they fixed it, and we still have some other niggling problems. But here you can see, in spite of the patch, right? I'm not sure if this was played pre-patch or post-patch, but your defensive line, when your wingbacks punch forward, and if you don't get the pass into space working properly, what's going to happen is those balls are going to get intercepted. You see, the thing about pass into space is that it's a risky pass, right? It's a pass that is played into space. By default, your passes are played to feet. So when you play pass into space, the pass goes into space. So what you really need to do is you need to make sure that the players who are playing pass into, you need to know who the players are who are playing pass into space. You need to know what to look out for. So basically, when you have a game, you're trying to make sure that your ball moves from transitions, through transitions effectively, from defense. Your defenders get to pass the ball to midfield. The midfielders get to pass the ball to the strikers. If the ball doesn't get to the strikers, what's going to happen is you lose the ball. And if you play pass into space ineffectively, you could lose the ball. In fact, you could just downright have no possession in the game. So playing pass into space requires us to pay attention to all these kind of things. That was a pass, a ball that was played into space. Your player ran onto it and then picked it up and then drove into the box. But if you are playing the game and you try to build up play and you lose the ball in transition, so here we have your player with the ball, he gets further up and it tries to play a pass into space, it gets intercepted. Your players are already committed in the attacking transition. You leave yourself vulnerable to the counter attack. If you're playing against a team that's very fast and can play the ball quickly in their transitions and get their players up in support like this, you could find yourself vulnerable to goals. So pass into space, you gotta do something with the second ball. If you don't do something with the second ball, you're in a world of hurt. So looking at a tactic, this is how you set a tactic up. You played Attacking with wide, you play shorter passing, pass into space, early crosses, positive mentality. With a high defensive line and a standard line of engagement, what? Immediately I go into this and I'm going, okay, I like the tactic, but you have to understand what the high defensive line does. It commits your bodies forward, right, from the back line. So the back line's got a further distance to cover when you lose the ball. Good for teams that have got acceleration of 14 or 15 in the back line, but very bad for teams that have got poor acceleration, anticipation, concentration, and positioning. So your boys are going to be caught with balls over the top, which is what we were seeing. Second thing that I noticed was when you play to stretch the pitch wider, you're also going to encourage more crosses into the game. It's just a natural function of how the game is. So, but you're also playing on shorter passing. I do this all the time because I know my players. I know that some of my players will be able to get the balls out wide. There's nothing wrong with playing expansive style of football. In fact, playing expansive football is great, especially if you can trigger pass into space proactively. But we want to use pass into space a bit more cautiously, right? So here I would go, most of my games, I'll probably start fairly narrow. Why? Because I want to keep the ball. Look, I want to guarantee that I win. I want to make sure that I keep the ball and then use pass into space with some the players, because then the next thing we do is we try to identify who's going to be using pass into space. 1, 2, 3, 4. I'm not sure, but Carrello, we have to check. 5. Okay, these guys are definitely. So basically, you got an entire team of players that are going to be using pass into space. What I also recommend, and I did this in my setup, was I changed this guy to a central defender on defense. So we've got this entire group of players who are all going to be using pass into space, right? So you got a whole bunch of players. This whole group are going to try to play the Hollywood pass, because you've got these two players that are waiting for those kind of passes. It's a great instruction to use, but we gotta recognize when and where it can be a risk, because if any of these players are gonna start playing those kind of passes, then you gotta see whether the passes are being received. If the passes are not being received, instead they're being intercepted, how does your team look like when that happens? Because we saw one transition earlier where you had nobody in midfield. Basically, your midfielders were already moving into attack, because when you're looking at most of these duties, they're all on support duties. So these players are all going to switch it up and join your attack to support the attack, especially if you start playing on higher mentalities. 1, 2, 3, 4 may all get forward. Remember, you're also using the counter press. So when you're using the counter press, when your team has possession of the ball and then loses it, all these players are going to try and win the ball back. And if that fails, then you're going to have a bigger gap between your defenders and your midfielders, which puts you in a very bad position. So pass into space is not something that you want to use as a rule. What I normally do in most of my games is I ask myself a question: do I want to keep the ball and then use pass into space? This is exactly what I'll do. That's exactly what I do. So I go fairly narrow, I remove pass into space, and I start my game. And I look at possession numbers. I look at how we're building play up. Are we doing okay? And then I look for telltale signs. Is the opposition playing with wingbacks? If they are their wingbacks very high up the pitch? If they are very high up the pitch, this is a good time for me to use pass into space. The other thing I also want to do in most of my games is I want to ask myself, if I wanted to begin a game proactively, that I want to go out there and I want to take the game to the opposition, I want to get a quick early goal. How do I do this? Then I'll go standard defensive line, standard line of engagement. Now I'm not committing my boys. Now the standard defensive line just says like 50-50. Don't have to go too far up the pitch. It's like really chicken way of playing. Okay, and this is what I like to do. Yes, don't laugh at me. Then I play on a higher attacking mentality, and I trigger pass into space. What have I done now? Now I'm basically trying to hold my defenders back. I'm taking a lot of risk with my players, but my wingbacks aren't gonna do the early runs. They're not. I mean, they will still make the runs, but at least now with an attacking mentality, I'm playing pass into space. But it's the defensive line I'm trying to check at the moment, right? So this is gonna affect all these players. So this is something that I did in your games, which is basically just taken this tactic, and all I did was just make small tweaks to it. There are certain things I've noticed as well. There are some players in your team that you might want to consider when you get promoted. You might have to go out there and get some better players for some of these positions. Like if you do a quick pick for your team, you notice that you have players that are suspended for some games. Yes, it was unfortunate for me that I couldn't use this guy for a while. Brandon Williams, he was a pretty decent left back. Right. Compared to this player, Neil Taylor. Neil Taylor might be okay, but in a lot of the games I was playing, his poor technique let him down. I would have situations where I would have to cover, somebody would have to come back and recover because Neil Taylor was making mistakes. And the other problem we had was the wide midfielder positions. Most of your wide midfielders don't have good anticipation and don't have good concentration, which doesn't make them very good options to help you screen your backline because they are sometimes out of position. And in this particular case, Connor Mahoney, who is not a bad player in a 4-2-3-1, but as a WM, his positioning is really bad. He doesn't offer anything in terms of supporting your backline. So while it was a challenge for me, so I took it upon myself to treat it like a challenge. How would I approach this game? Playing a 4-4-2, I did for 3 matches. I played a 4-4-2, and I also played a 4-2-3-1. Because I think your players can also play a 4-2-3-1. Because if you have these players who aren't like they're not that bad, and you got 2 players that you can play as holding players in midfield. Right, we got Molumbu here on loan from Brighton, and I think you got another player here on loan from Manchester United. These guys are not bad. They can be played in central midfield. You got at least 2 decent central midfielders. Then we can sacrifice these guys and ask them to go forward and join the attack. So we can definitely play a 4-2-3-1 as well. So as it turns out, I took over your team. We beat Swansea in our first game. We beat Charlton in our second game. Then we drew against Middlesbrough, and I decided to experiment with the 4-2-3-1. We trounced Hull 3-1, and then followed that up with a nice 1-0 win over Blackburn that sealed our playoff spot. And we finished, comfortably in the playoffs. Now let's take a look at some of the games, and I'll run through what I did in those games. Against Swansea, we played fairly narrow, no pass into space, positive mentality. I dropped the central defender to defend, and it was a simple game. The boys played the ball around. We had a standard defensive line, a standard line of engagement, nothing too fancy, and we did well with the ball. And then the playmaker found the pressing forward, or rather the Carrillo, and the Carrillo scores the goal, and that's it. 2-0 win over Swansea without too much effort. Our next match was against Charlton. Charlton were playing a narrow diamond. We don't want the wingbacks to get up the pitch, so what do? We encourage them to come up the pitch. So I went to a defense. I started playing with a narrow defensive. We played with a higher defensive line, and we also added pass into space. I love the fact that we didn't waste too much time with our attacks. Ball straight out to the white midfielder. White midfielder goes long for the pressing forward. The pressing forward gets inside the box, and then he scores the opening goal. Now, we conceded this goal to Charlton. I was a bit disappointed with Neil Taylor, your wing-back. His technique isn't very good. Right? His balance, agility, he lost the ball. A ball he should never have lost, and we conceded a goal. Don't forget, most players can play pass into space when that's triggered. So here our wing-back plays a ball into space. Pressing forward gets onto the end of this and makes it our second goal. For our match against Middlesbrough, I went a bit too aggressive. They were playing a 4-2-3-1, and I decided I wanted to become a bit more attacking. Went with a higher defensive line, with a higher line of engagement, with pass into space. It turned out to be a big mistake. They scored an early goal, and I realized I was giving up too much possession. So I removed pass into space, dropped the defensive line and the line of engagement, and eventually got the equalizer. Against Hull, we went with a 4-2-3-1. We did have a lot of good luck with corners. Jake Cooper scoring both the goals from a corner, and then our third goal came from a nice ball out wide, which our wide midfielder finished off, giving us a 3-1 win over Hull City. Your request was for me to take a look at a 4-4-2 with options for pass into space. For our match against Blackburn, I decided to play on an attacking mentality with pass into space, with a standard defensive line and a standard line of engagement. So we wanted to go out there and play a fairly aggressive game, and that's exactly what we did. I enjoyed the winning goal because your target man did a really good job running out a bit wide and then holding the ball up for the wide midfielder who comes into the box and smashes it home. So those sequence of wins, enough for us to seal our playoff spots. Pass into space is pretty much something that some people just leave it on their tactics and just go ahead and play with it. I am a big proponent of using it based on in-game situations. If you find that you have the space and you think you can exploit space, that's when you want to use pass into space, because it triggers off passes that can easily be intercepted if a team is sitting back to defend. This is the problem a lot of people have against the low block. Sometimes they download the tactic and it has pass into space, but these guys are not coming out. They got wingbacks on defense, they got fullbacks on defense, they got 5 players in their defensive third. If you use pass into space, then it can also help, because you're looking to play passes into space if you're camping, but you have to be looking at the game itself to see whether it's a good idea. Do you have lots of possession? That's the first thing you want to check. Are you having lots of possession? If you are having lots of possession in the defensive third, and if you want to use pass into space, why not? But think about your defensive line as well. Because if you push pass into space and you push a higher mentality, that's when you want to start thinking, is your defensive line too high? If your defensive line is too high, then you're also asking your fullbacks to be further up the pitch to support play. And if the ball comes over the top, you might concede a goal. So pass into space should be considered very carefully. I like to use it in these combinations. If I'm going to play with an attacking mentality with pass into space, then I drop my defensive line. I can also choose to play on a positive mentality with pass into space and a higher defensive line to get my boys to support the attacks. If I play against narrow systems, then I go defensive with narrow. Otherwise, I leave it on the default setting. Right. So if I find that I'm playing against a narrow tactic, like a 4-1-2-2-1 diamond or a 4-3-1-2, any system that has got wingbacks as the only options to give them width, then I will always drop to a narrow defensive width to encourage the wingbacks to come up the pitch, and then I will hit pass into space regardless of what my mentality is. If I'm playing attacking mentality or whether I'm playing positive mentality, I'll hit pass into space because there is going to be space down the flanks. So this is something that you want to consider. The other thing I was looking at was attacking width, because I wanted to use pass into space aggressively. Then I'll drop my attacking width so that I can keep my players together a lot more, so that we can keep possession of the ball. So pass into space is something that you want to think about in your game when you want to apply it. Well, this was one fun. Well, I enjoyed this Game Changer episode. It was a challenge to get into the playoffs. We managed to get into the playoffs. I'm more interested to find out how you did. So you know how to find me. You can always... Well, I'm really interested to see how you do in the playoffs. Please share your performances in the playoffs with me here on Discord. Well, I'm very excited to see that. I'm going to be interested to find out how you do in the playoffs. Right, so if you can share that information with me on Discord, that will be fantastic. Pass into space can be a tricky little proposition. Sometimes people have it on default for all their tactics. I don't recommend it. I recommend looking at your tactic and understanding why pass into space is there in the first place, and when can it be really a deadly instruction that you want to utilize to break down some of the defensive sides in this game. Well, I hope you enjoyed this edition of Game Changer. If you have any questions, please look me up on Twitter at Bustthenet or addicted2fm.com, my website. Once again, I want to thank everybody for the continued support this channel and make these kind of shows possible for the rest of the community. You guys take care, have a good one. I'll see you again soon. Bye bye.